I'm Kurtop, and these are 100 skeletons found by archaeologists that don't look like humans. Remains of a human, over 1 million years old. Archaeologists discovered unique remains of an ancient human in the Spanish cave Cima del Elefante, who lived about 1,400,000 years ago. The skull fragment found is the oldest ever discovered in Western Europe and represents a previously unknown human species to science. The part of the face that was found, nicknamed Pink by scientists after the band Pink Floyd, preserved the left cheek and upper jaw with teeth. According to experts, this ancient human was very different from the later inhabitants of the region, known as Homo antecessor. For example, Pink had a flatter nose shape, more reminiscent of Homo erectus, the first species to leave Africa about 1,800,000 years ago. At that time, the climate of Europe was much milder, and the valleys in the area of Cima del Elefante were covered with dense forests and inhabited by hippos, bison, and deer. It awoke in Siberia in the summer of 2016 in Yamal. A 12-year-old boy died after being diagnosed with anthrax, a disease that hadn't been seen in this region since 1941. It had been absent for 75 years, and suddenly it appeared again. Several dozen more people got sick and thousands of reindeer died. What happened? That summer was unusually hot. The permafrost thawed deeper than usual in one place, and the carcass of a reindeer that had been buried in the ground since 1941 was exposed. The anthrax bacteria in it were alive for 75,000 years. Permafrost is the perfect preservative. The temperature is around zero, there's no oxygen, and no light. Some microbes in such conditions not only survive, they can come back to life after thousands of years. In 2015, French scientists extracted a 30,000-year-old virus from Siberian ice, kept it under laboratory conditions, and it came back to life and started reproducing. And before that, it was simply waiting for 30,000 years. That virus only infects single-celled amoebas, not humans. But in the permafrost lie the remains of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and early humans. All of them suffered from diseases that no longer exist today. We have no immunity to them. We've never encountered them before. We didn't evolve alongside them. At the same time, humanity is now actively developing the Arctic, building roads, drilling wells, extracting oil. Every drilling rig is an intrusion into the frozen layer that hasn't been touched for thousands of years. Every hot summer means a few more centimeters of thawed ground. Every centimeter is another layer of what's inside. At the same time, virologists talk about another scenario. In history, pandemics almost always started with a single contact, a human and an animal that had never met before. Ebola from bats in the tropical forest, SARS from the markets of southern China. The Spanish flu of 1918 killed more people than all of World War I. It took between 50 and 100 million lives in about 2 years. And every time at first people thought, that's somewhere far away, it definitely won't affect us. Virologists are preparing for the possibility of a disease as deadly as Ebola emerging. Such a disease could kill 1 in 2 or 3 people worldwide, but one that is transmitted by airborne droplets, like the flu. Ebola doesn't spread far because it kills its host too quickly, but viruses are constantly mutating. In one sick person, the virus divides trillions of times a day. Most mutations are dead ends, but 1 in a million could be different. This is not science fiction. This is exactly the kind of mutation scientists were tracking in 2012, when a modified bird flu virus capable of airborne transmission was created in a laboratory. The publication of the study was blocked by several governments who considered it too dangerous for open access. This means that the line between the impossible and what has already happened is thinner than we think. Did you know about this 30,000-year-old virus that scientists actually revived? And where did it go after that? Write in the comments. The next story is about 225,000 people who died within a few hours, and about why something similar could happen again on a much larger scale. An ancient sanctuary with human remains. On a cliff rising above the Tuve River, archaeologists found a huge stepped pyramid, which apparently once served as the foundation of the central palace. The city, which covered about 400 hectares, was surrounded by massive stone walls, both outer and inner. In addition, archaeologists also discovered several pits filled with human skulls here. According to scientists, they belong to people who were sacrificed here on a large scale several thousand years ago. Archaeologists consider the find especially valuable, since until now scientists knew little about Chinese civilization during the Bronze Age. Experts can only say with confidence that the main centers of civilization at that time were located on Los Plateaus, and that the Chinese settled on the Central Plain later. The ancient city, named Shimao, according to scientists, flourished from 2300 to 1800 BC, occupying about 400 hectares at that time. The stepped pyramid rising in the center on the lowest cliff consists of 11 giant steps that narrow toward the top. Next to the pyramid, which apparently served as the main palace, an extensive open square was found, where rituals and political gatherings probably took place. At least that's what archaeologists believe. In their opinion, the palace stood on top of the pyramid and was built from carefully compacted earth with wooden columns and a tiled roof. Scientists think wealthy and noble city residents lived in the upper section of the complex near the pyramid. A giant eye carved in stone and several anthropomorphic faces were discovered on the facade of the pyramid. The pyramid, over 70 meters tall, was visible from any point in the city and even from the surrounding villages. It probably served as a formidable reminder of the power and authority of the ruling elite of Shimao, a stone embodiment of the social pyramid. The monk who became a Buddha from within. Let's get back to the monk, because this story is much crazier than it seems at first glance. The procedure is called Sokushin Butsu, which roughly translates as becoming a Buddha in this body. It was practiced in Japan starting around the 9th century. The idea is simple and absolutely wild at the same time. A monk could achieve enlightenment not through death, but by turning his body into an incorruptible relic while still alive. How did this work in practice? This is where the real horror begins. Stage 1, 2,000 days of the strictest discipline, a strict diet. No meat, no grains, only nuts, seeds, roots, and tree bark. The body begins to consume itself. Fat disappears. Moisture leaves the muscles. This was done intentionally. The less organic matter in the body, the less insects and bacteria will be able to destroy it after death. Stage 2. The monk began to drink tea made from the sap of the urushi tree. This is a lacquer tree, the very same tree from which Japanese lacquer is made. The sap is poisonous. In large doses, it kills, but in small amounts it covers the internal organs with a thin protective film. For insects, this smell is unbearable. The body literally becomes inedible from the inside. Stage 3, the box. The monk sits in the lotus position. He was placed in a wooden sarcophagus and either buried or sealed up. 2 tubes, one for air, the other for the bell's rope. Every day, 1 ring, alive, every day. No one knows what he thought about in the darkness, what he felt when he realized the air was running out, how the last ring of the bell sounded. When the bell fell silent, the tubes were sealed. After 1,000 days, the box was opened. If the body was preserved, the monk was deemed a living Buddha, lacquered, dressed in ritual clothes, and placed in a temple for worship. If not, he was buried with honors. Out of hundreds of monks who tried to follow this path, only a few succeeded. In Japan, about 12 confirmed cases are known. Monk Lu Quan is one of them. His statue stood in a Chinese temple for several centuries. Then somehow it ended up in private hands. Eventually it was placed in a Dutch museum. No one knew what was inside. Just an old statue of a monk. There are thousands like it. In 2015, researchers decided to perform a CT scan, a standard procedure for studying old sculptures to check for cracks or cavities, and they found him sitting in the same lotus position. Inside the bronze and gold, there is a man who, 1,000 years ago, decided to become a god, and did. Analysis showed, inside the skull and chest cavity, there are scrolls with Chinese characters instead of internal organs. Monks sometimes filled the body cavities with sacred texts so that wisdom would literally live inside the relic. This is no longer history, this is some other genre. Now the question is, if a monk was willing to spend 3 years in darkness in order to become incorruptible, what does that tell us about people? That we have always looked for a way to cheat death. And sometimes they did it so radically that 1,000 years later, Dutch scientists would open a statue and discover that it actually worked. A family of warriors from the 9th century. In Hungary, archaeologists discovered 3 warrior graves dating back to around 920 to 930 AD. At first glance, these seemed like ordinary graves from the early Middle Ages, but analysis revealed a detail that completely changes the picture. All 3 were related through the male line, most likely a father and 2 sons. The burial inventory indicates a high status: a saber, a bow with a quiver, decorated harness, silver and gold elements of clothing, dozens of coins. One of the young men died at 17 or 18 years old, the other even earlier. The eldest died at about 30 years old. All 3 mainly ate meat, which confirms that they belonged to the military elite. The coins found in the graves come from northern Italy and date back to the reign of King Berengar. This coincides with the period of Hungarian military campaigns to the west. It is likely that the family obtained their loot there. The burial reflects a strong military lineage connected to origin, campaigns, and power. The weapons, jewelry, and inventory suggest elite status and involvement in more campaigns. The matching dates, paternal ties, and burial types reveal a family rooted in the early military structure.
Сударство.
Military abductions and secret bases, thousands of stories, hundreds of memoirs, and they all say the same thing: contact has already happened. But not in front of the world, not live on air. It happened in the shadows, under a top-secret classification. One of the most discussed cases is the story of Cheris James Hall, a U.S. Air Force veteran who served at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. He claims he worked side by side with aliens, whites, grays, even Nordics. Tall humanoids, similar to humans. According to him, the whites could live up to 700 years, and the contact was officially limited to technology exchange. According to another version, the U.S. authorities allowed aliens to set up a temporary base on Earth, supposedly for the sake of technology exchange, a Cold War-style deal. You give us, we give you. But what exactly did they give to humans? Genetic material? Permission for abductions? Yes, abductions. In the 1960s, a whole wave of stories about night visits, examinations, implants, and mysterious dreams broke out in the U.S. and Europe, after which scars and fragments of memories remained. Many of those abducted were not fanatics or ufologists. They were doctors, military personnel, engineers, people who suddenly came to know too much. Today, these stories are ridiculed or ignored, but one fact remains. The number of testimonies is too great to simply dismiss them as imagination. A fragment of an arrow in a dinosaur skeleton. No matter how much archaeologists and anthropologists want to create a comprehensive theory of civilization's origin that includes every artifact, it's impossible. The findings scream that humanity is millions of years old, but academic science doesn't want to hear them. According to the accepted theory of evolution, Homo sapiens appeared 30,000 years ago, and the settlement of America happened no more than 12 to 20,000 years ago. However, even before Darwin published his work on the origin of man, discoveries appeared that contradicted this theory. This happened in the spring of 1863 in the town of Saint-Priest in the northwest of France. An employee of the French National Museum of Natural History, Jules de Neuve, found animal fossils in rock that was 1.6 million years old, on which clear parallel grooves and round marks left by a knife were visible. Moreover, the traces of processing were covered with minerals, just like the fossil itself, which means they were left before the remains became fossilized. French academics explained the origin of the marks as being caused by glaciers or even by shovel marks from workers. The scientists were also not convinced by the fact that later, in the same Saint-Priest deposits, archaeologist Louis Bourget found a number of flint tools, which anthropologist Armand de Quatrefages identified as scrapers, drills, and picks, but the discovery was dismissed. In 1865 in Italy, on the banks of the Arno River, worked bones of the southern elephant and Etruscan rhinoceros were found. The elephant became extinct about 1.3 million years ago, and the rhinoceros no less than 8 million years ago. In 1968, in one of the mines of the city of Billy in France, a fragment of a rhinoceros jaw was found, on which 4 parallel grooves were clearly visible. Archaeologist Laucedo presented this fragment to the academics and pointed out that in ancient times someone had tried to chop the jaw. The rocks in which the fossil was found were 15 million years old. In 1872, English geographer Edward Charles Sword found drilled shark teeth deep within the red cliff. The rocks in which the teeth were preserved formed about 2.5 million years ago. At a meeting of the Royal Anthropological Institute, the scientist was ridiculed with claims that the holes in the teeth were made either by mollusks, parasites, or cavities. Charles Sword was supported only by a certain Collier, who examined the holes under a microscope and confirmed that their edges showed signs of mechanical working, and the holes were located exactly in the center, which ruled out coincidence. It is noteworthy that at the beginning of the 20th century, stone tools over 2 million years old were also discovered there. The Englishman Notcott found a piece of petrified wood in Mythical that someone had sawed off 400 or 500,000 years ago. By the quality of the cut, it was clear that it was done by Homo sapiens. The next discovery happened in 1874 on the coast of the Dardanelles Strait in Turkey. Here, the archaeologist Calvert found a fossil of the extinct elephant Dinotherium in Miocene strata, on which animal drawings had been carved. Here, he also discovered flint tools and bones that had been split to extract bone marrow. In 1970, the first challenge to anthropologists' ideas about the settlement of America arose in Canada. In the glacial floodplain of the Old Crow River, which formed 80,000 years ago, animal horns were found and processed by Richard Marlan, an employee of the Canadian Museum. His opponents argued that, for the most part, the glacier was to blame. However, expert Pat Shipman from Johns Hopkins University studied the fossil fragments and proved that one of them has processing marks that are left on bones when a carcass is skinned. Even more scientists were stirred by the discovery of George Miller, a staff member at California College who found 6 mammoth bones with knife marks in the Anza Borrego Desert near San Diego. Also, one scratch crossed 2 bones, indicating it was made while butchering the carcass. Isotope analysis showed that the mammoth was 300,000 years old, while paleomagnetic dating gave an age of 750,000 years. It was shaping up to be a sensation, but Miller's opponents simply refused to examine the fossils and hinted to him that no scientific journal would publish his articles. In 1979 in Tanzania, footprints of a barefoot human were found on the ash of a volcano that erupted 3.6 million years ago. Anthropologist Mary Leakey studied them and concluded that the foot of the ancient Tanzanian was no different from that of a Cro-Magnon, although according to Darwin, only creatures with ape-like feet lived at that time. They still lack the courage to admit humans walked the earth millions of years ago. However, Argentinians truly disprove scientists' beliefs about when America was settled. First, 19th century scientist Florentino Ameghino found stone tools, worked bones, and ancient hearths on the Monte Hermoso beach. All of this was preserved in a layer that was determined to be 3.5 million years old. Florentino Ameghino's contemporaries did not object to the idea that all of this was evidence of Homo sapiens, but they did not agree with the dating. From a late Pliocene layer, 2.8 million years old Florentino Ameghino extracted another find, a toxodon femur with a fragment of an arrowhead or spear tip. It wasn't a single bone, but was attached to the tibia and had typical coloring, and the fossil's cavities were filled with forest material. Even if the fossil had ended up in the sedimentary rocks from an upper layer, it would still be ancient. The age of the rocks lying above was estimated at 400,000 to 1.5 million years. When a fragment was extracted from the bone, it turned out to be part of a Mousterian-type quartzite tip shaped like a willow leaf, which was common in Europe. All this suggests that people lived much earlier than official history tells us. We will never be able to prove this 100%. But you shouldn't believe official history 100% either. However, you can easily become smarter and broaden your horizons here on our channel. The site of the Great Battle. In the Tollens Valley, Germany, archaeologists discovered one of the oldest battlefields in Europe, which is about 3,250 years old. It all started in 1996 when researchers found a bone sticking out of the riverbank. This became the starting point for the discovery of a real warrior's cemetery. So far, more than 12,500 bones have been found belonging to hundreds of people who fought, as well as about 300 bronze and stone artifacts. Among the finds are arrowheads, spears, swords, clubs, and protective gear. The uniqueness of the discovery lies in the fact that weapons are often found right in the skeletons, confirming how brutal the battle was. Many warriors died right in the water or on the shore, and their bodies remained untouched for centuries. This place reveals to us an unknown page of Bronze Age history. It is possible that a battle took place here between different tribes fighting for territory or resources. Talens proves that wars were fought long before antiquity, and that ancient armies were more organized than previously thought. Baby Mammoth Genya. The Taimyr State Museum in Dudinka is one of the best museums in the Arctic and in Russia. Among the museum's many exhibits is one of its main and most interesting pieces. This is the Sapkarginsky baby mammoth, unofficially named Genya the baby mammoth. It was discovered in 2012 near the village of Vorontsov, not far from the polar weather station Sopochnaya Karga. This place is at the mouth of the Yenisei River, where it flows into the Kara Sea. Scientists studied the remains of the ancient animal in detail, and it turned out that the baby mammoth was about 1.5 to 2 years old, and it lived approximately 44 to 45,000 years ago. Being the largest land mammals in history, mammoths inhabited the territories of North America, Europe, and northern Eurasia. It is known that adult mammoths reached a height of about 5 to 5.5 meters, and their weight was around 10 to 12 tons. The lifespan of these ancient animals was about 55 to 60 years. The last glaciation, which occurred 10,000 years ago, caused the extinction of the mammoths. It is known that the dwarf mammoths that lived on Wrangel Island became extinct about 5,000 years ago. The last time a well-preserved mammoth carcass was found was over 100 years ago, the Sapkarginsky mammoth calf. It is interesting that the Sapkarginsky mammoth calf was not found by scientists, but by an 11-year-old Nenets boy named Genya Salender. While walking along the banks of the Yenisei, he discovered an unusual find. He told the staff at the polar weather station about it. They, in turn, informed the scientists. Paleontologists then began their work. From the thawing permafrost on the banks of the Yenisei, the bones of the skeleton, the hide, meat, tusk, most of the internal organs, and the fat hump of the ancient animal were extracted. It is known that the baby mammoth weighed more than 500 kilos and stood about 180 centimeters tall. An important feature of this animal was that instead of 2 tusks, it had only one. Experts determined that it was born this way. UFOs and hoaxes. One of the most sensational stories is the so-called Roswell alien autopsy. That very video where a strange creature with a huge head is lying on a table and doctors are pulling something out of it. Back in the 90s, the footage was shown on television to millions of people. Almost everyone believed it, but later it turned out to be staged. The creator of the video, Ray Santilli, later admitted, yes, the film is a recreation and the real footage is supposedly lost. But he still claims that he saw the original, and the footage matches what was shown to CIA employees. And here's what's interesting. Even after admitting it was a fake, people continued to believe in it. Moreover, now this fragment is being sold as an NFT for $1 million. Why all this? What does a fake give? It gives the main things: hype, attention, belief, and money. More noise makes truth harder to find and speculation easier to replace reality. And here's the question. If even lies work to strengthen belief, who is blurring the line between facts and fakes, and why? A skull with a metal plate. 2,000 years ago, somewhere in pre-Hispanic Peru, a man received a blow to the head. We don't know with what. Maybe it was a stone, maybe a club with a metal tip. Maybe it happened in battle, maybe in a ritual duel. But the skull fracture was so serious that without intervention, he would have died. That's a medical fact visible on the bone. Then someone used a piece of metal, probably from a household item, a bowl, a fastener, some kind of fragment that happened to be the right size and shape. It was processed, shaped to fit the fracture, and implanted directly into the skull bone. This skull is now kept at the Museum of Osteology in Oklahoma. It is about 2,000 years old, and it is one of the most inconvenient exhibits for people who think that ancient people were primitive because the patients survived. This is not an assumption. It is literally written in the bone. Regeneration began around the metal plate. Bone tissue started to grow around the implant. To accept it, to fuse with it, this is a process that takes months. It means the person lived long enough after the surgery for his body to adapt to the piece of metal in his skull. Think about what this means in practice. Someone 2,000 years ago understood that it was necessary to stop the bleeding, close the wound, and fix the bone. and understood it well enough to do it with metal and not kill the patient with infection, blood loss, or shock from the pain. There was probably anesthesia. Coca was known in Peru. There was definitely some form of wound sterilization. This is neurosurgery, and in the 1st century AD. Without hospitals, without education, without textbooks. By the way, the exact composition of the metal is still not determined. Museum representatives admit this. Research is ongoing. It might be copper. It might be an alloy. But even without knowing the composition, we know the main thing. It worked. Now, the second feature of this skull, it's elongated, intentionally stretched. Not a disease, not an anomaly, but a tradition. In pre-Hispanic Peru, elites were recognizable by their head shapes, as children's heads were tightly bound with special boards from birth, and the skull gradually took on an elongated shape. It was a sign of status that couldn't be faked. It was formed over years, starting from early childhood. This means that our warrior with metal in his head was a person from the upper class, which adds another layer to the story. The elite, that means he had access to the best specialists, people who knew how to do this. Perhaps that's why he survived, while an ordinary soldier with the same fracture would simply die. Medicine 2,000 years ago worked on the same principles as today. If you have money and connections, your chances are better. Some things never change. Elongated skulls. Archaeologists made a stunning discovery in Antarctica, remains of people with elongated skulls. Even more interesting, similar elongated skulls have been found all over the world. In Peru, Egypt, Russia, and elsewhere in Europe, scientists found out that people intentionally deformed their children's skulls right from birth. But here's the mystery. Different peoples who lived vast distances apart did this, possibly even without any contact with each other. And the question of why remains unanswered. Maybe people were trying to gain superpowers or emphasize their status, or maybe they wanted to look like gods. Maybe it was a trend, like tattoos or piercings today. Creepy. But today, in some tribes in South America, this tradition still exists. Genetic discs. Imagine, we only started using microscopes a couple of centuries ago, and genetics has only been studied for about 150 years. And then suddenly, they find a 6,000-year-old stone disc in South America, which depicts scenes on a microscopic level. How can something like that be explained? This disc is known as the genetic disc, respected among archaeologists as a true relic. It is made of lydite, a hard basalt rock. It weighs about 2 kilograms and has a diameter of 22 centimeters. But the real shock is the symbols depicted on it. Just think about it. Sperm cells, egg cells, fertilization, and the stages of fetal development. All of this is depicted in chronological order, and if you turn the disc over, you can see moments of cell division and even the development of amphibians. Don't be alarmed, even archaeologists are shocked. Now think about it. Such a disc was found in Colombia among 6,000-year-old artifacts, but at the same time, it doesn't look at all like items from the pre-Columbian era, and the symbols on it are unknown. Could it be even older? How could an ancient civilization make something like this and know things we've only discovered in the past few centuries? It's such a mysterious object that some have even suggested it was created by serpent people. But there really is a snake on the disc. This disc calls into question our entire system of understanding South American culture. Some believe it's a fake, but we know that South America is full of mysteries. The child with a lock on the leg, Poland, the village of Penn. 17th century archaeologists are exploring an abandoned cemetery and find a child's skeleton. The age is about 5 to 7 years old. The body is lying face down. There is a massive padlock on the leg. Old iron. Not everyone was buried like this, only those who were feared. Could people in ancient times really be afraid of a child? In folk beliefs, it was thought that a body buried face down could not be saved, and the lock is a kind of magical seal, so that the soul would not leave, not return, and not cause harm. Nearby, there is another well-known burial of a dead witch, a woman who had a sickle placed on her neck, so that if she tried to get up, she would behead herself. This child is most likely part of the same tradition. Skulls with nails. In the southeast of Spain, among the ruins of ancient settlements, archaeologists found something that immediately causes disturbing feelings. 7 severed heads. Some of them have huge metal nails driven in, not through, but with obvious force, as if the skulls were nailed to something. But why? At first they thought they were war trophies. Enemy heads were displayed for intimidation, but bone analysis revealed unexpected results. Not all the skulls were from outsiders. In one of the cities, 3 out of 4 heads belonged to people who came from far away. But in another, almost all turned out to be locals. And that changes everything. Because in one place, apparently outsiders really were executed and put on display. But in another, their own ancestors were kept like foreign relics. The heads were found near houses, inside the dwellings. So this is no longer a demonstration of power. This is remembrance and respect. The Greeks wrote that the Gauls kept the heads of their enemies in boxes, and Spanish mercenaries carried them on spears. But in reality, it was all more complicated. The Montserrat mummy. The story of the alien mummies from Peru has taken an unexpected turn. Inside one of them, named Montserrat, scientists allegedly discovered the remains of an embryo. In the scan, you can see a small fetus lying on its back. According to calculations, it was the 30th week of pregnancy. The mummy itself is female, about 160 centimeters tall, with metal implants in her arms and chest. The find is about 1,200 years old, or maybe even older. Montserrat is part of a controversial collection that was presented in 2017 by the Mexican ufologist Jaime Maussan. He claimed that all the mummies are real and that they have nothing to do with humans. In 2023, he repeated this statement under oath in the Mexican parliament. According to him, these beings have 3 fingers, an unusual anatomy, and do not resemble any earthly creature. But there is another side to the story. A forensic examination in Peru found glue, paper, metal inserts, and fragments of animal bones in these mummies. The conclusion was harsh. The artifacts are artificially assembled dolls. However, not everyone agrees with this. American jazz musician and amateur ufologist William Gallison personally saw the mummies before the whole world learned about them. He believes that these could have been ritual composite constructions created many centuries ago. But if these are really fakes, the main question arises, why? Why would someone more than 1,000 years ago assemble such complex artifacts when even today they baffle scientists? The oldest infant burial in Europe. Archaeologists rarely find the bones of ancient children, especially newborns, because they are small and fragile and therefore cannot remain intact for thousands of years, like adult bones. And even if scientists do find ancient children's burials, it's usually impossible to determine their sex because DNA does not preserve in their bones. However, the remains discovered in an Italian cave turned out to be an exception. They lay there for more than 10,000 years, but still contain enough DNA. The research showed that they belonged to a Homo sapiens girl who died at the age of 40 to 50 days. The find includes several bones of the child, as well as beads made from seashells that decorated the shroud she was wrapped in. In addition, an eagle owl claw was found nearby, which apparently was placed as a gift. The research showed that this is the earliest known burial of a female Homo sapiens infant in Europe. The Arma Cave in northwestern Italy, where the infant's remains were found, has provided many interesting discoveries for scientists studying human evolution. Excavations that began in 2014 showed that it was inhabited by both Neanderthals and early modern humans. Therefore, the artifacts and traces of cave life were left during the transitional period between the last Neanderthals and the first Homo sapiens. This is precisely the period about which science knows very little. The remains of a human child were discovered by chance in 2017 when scientists were searching for traces of Neanderthals. However, the grave was only fully excavated in 2018. Next to the remains, archaeologists found more than 60 beads and pendants made from 2 types of shells. All of them appear to have been sewn onto a fabric covering. This suggests that someone from ancient times visited the coast, traveling 20 kilometers through the forest. But it is quite possible that ancient people traded such ornaments. The girl, whose remains were discovered in the cave, was named Neve, after the river that flows nearby. Scientists were unable to determine from her few bones what caused her death. Female, and also male, infants were regarded as members of their society right after birth. This is significant, as the age when infants were recognized as individuals was still uncertain. Drawing conclusions from several earlier ancient children's burials was difficult. It was previously believed that richly decorated burials belonged to men, because men had status and women did not. But recent archaeological findings disprove this idea. Researchers hope that in the future they will be able to find even more female burials, including those of infants, which will help answer most of the existing questions. The incorrupt body of the saint in August 2024, the coffin of Saint Teresa of Avila, was opened for the first time in 111 years. Crowds filled the Spanish basilica to witness something that, by all biological laws, should have vanished. But the body of the nun who died in 1582 remained incorrupt. Her face is recognizable, her limbs are preserved, and most importantly, there is something inexplicable present. Strange calcified spikes protrude from her feet, as if the bone itself continued to live on its own. It took 10 keys to open the sarcophagus, each kept by different authorities: the Duke, the monastery, and the Vatican. The access system is more like a ritual than a technical procedure. Scientists examined the remains, compared them to century-old photos, and found no logical explanation for their preservation. Her death was recorded at the Alba de Tormes monastery. She walked there on foot despite severe pain, and shortly before her death she said, "I have reached the house of death." After that, absolute peace, silence. And now, centuries later, a body that refuses to decompose. Believers speak of a miracle, researchers of a phenomenon. However, the question remains, if flesh can survive for centuries without decaying, what do we really know about the boundary between life and death? The pit of the headless. In Slovakia, archaeologists uncovered a burial site over 7,000 years old, nearly 40 bodies, and all but one are missing their skulls. The bodies are laid out neatly, no signs of violence, no chaos. Everything is too calm, as if someone knew exactly what they were doing and followed a plan. Only one child's head was preserved. No one understands why. Maybe the child was spared, or maybe, on the contrary, left as a sign. There are theories: a ritual, an execution, or an attempt to erase a person so completely that not even their image remained. The most important thing is below. What is the most famous place in Italy? Of course, the Colosseum. The amphitheater went through a lot during the heyday of the Roman Empire. Few people know that the space beneath the Colosseum is riddled with many floors, rooms, and staircases. This place is also called the Hive. Recently, tourists have been able to visit a place called the Hypogeum, but not everyone will dare to go here. Once, gladiators waited for their turn within these walls. Many clearly understood that they were going to certain death, and at that moment the cheering crowd was waiting for the show, anticipating the upcoming fight. Its finale was inevitably fatal for one of the fighters. They say the audience was in the same mood as modern people before a concert of their favorite artist. Under the Colosseum, there is a system of elevators that brought gladiators or animals directly onto the stage. By the way, not only brutal gladiator combat and animal fights took place here, there were also theatrical performances. However, the outcome was always the same: a tragic end for one or more participants. Most often, people sentenced to death were forced to take part in such events. Anyone can walk where those doomed to die once stood, experiencing what gladiators felt as they waited to enter. They say this isn't a place for the claustrophobic. The government didn't have the funds for the restoration of such an expensive project. The money came from a completely unexpected source: the fashion house Tod's. The work continued for a decade. It is thanks to the restoration that anyone can now see the underground world of the Colosseum, hidden from human eyes for 2 millennia. The amphitheater was opened at the dawn of the Common Era, in the year 80. At that time, and even today, it is the greatest architectural structure, equipped with many complex mechanisms, including hydraulic lifts. You could say that this place was once the center of the show business of ancient Rome. 5 centuries after its founding, the amphitheater fell into decline. Until the 15th century, it served no purpose and was dismantled for building materials. Offended mummies. The ancient astronaut theory is still popular. Its supporters claim that the gods were aliens, and ancient structures were built using their technology. Archaeologists, on the other hand, consider this a distortion of history and call such theories aliens in the gaps, when ignorance is replaced by fantasy. Such ideas often arise around Peru. After the book Chariots of the Gods, the Nazca lines began to be called landing strips for UFOs. although they are clearly visible from the hills and some of them are oriented towards stars and water sources. The most disturbing mummy from Peru was presented as alien. One of them, Maria, had 3 fingers, an elongated skull, and a frightening appearance. Journalist Jaime Maussan showed her in a film, but independent experts were denied access. The archaeologists suspected that these could have been the remains of a real person intentionally mutilated. Skull deformation was a common practice among many peoples, symbolizing high status. All the skulls that underwent the best DNA analyses turned out to be human. Not a single one was alien. The problem isn't with strange hypotheses, but that they insult real civilizations by attributing their achievements not to them, but to fictional beings. The mysterious disappearance of an advanced civilization. About 5,300 years ago, an ancient civilization arose in eastern China, building a magnificent city, the likes of which may never have been seen before in all of Asia, and perhaps even in the entire world. The surviving traces of the Liangzhu culture, which arose along the banks of the Yangtze River Delta in eastern China, are evidence of what this unique Neolithic society, which existed at the turn of the Stone Age, was capable of. The ruins of the city of Liangzhu, discovered by archaeologists, demonstrate numerous signs of social, cultural, and technological achievements of that period, especially in agriculture, including the construction of canals, dams, and reservoirs. However, this true wonder of the world existed for a very short time. After existing for about 1,000 years, the Liangzhu civilization mysteriously collapsed around 4,300 years ago, and the ancient city was suddenly abandoned. The most common theory was a massive flood, which was indicated by a thin layer of clay found on the ruins of the city. Nevertheless, a clear connection between the demise of such an advanced civilization and the unpredictable nature of the Yangtze River could not be established. So naturally, a huge number of various myths arose around this event. In a new study, an international team of scientists examined mineral formations, such as stalagmites from 2 underwater caves in the region, which preserve chemical traces of ancient climate conditions. Analysis of the samples showed that the destruction of the city of Liangzhu coincided with a period of extremely heavy rainfall, which likely lasted for decades, more than 4,300 years ago. As a result, the unending floods apparently forced the people of Liangzhu to abandon their capital and homes on the Taihu Plain, which ultimately led to the collapse of the entire civilization. For hundreds of years after that, other ancient cultures tried to replace Liangzhu, but the water literally destroyed any possibility for the development of Neolithic communities in the region. The strange long stone. In the history of archaeology, there are discoveries made not only by scientists, but also by ordinary people, often completely unexpectedly. That's how a farmer from Michigan, James Brissell, stumbled upon an archaeological sensation when he decided to lay a gas pipeline through his ranch. When James started digging, he didn't expect any surprises since the soil here was fertile and free of stones. But soon, the excavator hit something. Afraid of damaging the rented machine, the farmer stopped and decided to inspect the obstacle with a shovel. It turned out that it wasn't a stone, but something smooth and hard. Digging by hand, James soon realized that he was looking at a huge bone. He called his neighbors for help, and soon they managed to find several more large bones. At first, no one could say for sure which animal they belonged to. After a few hours, the amateur archaeologists reached the spot where the bones came together into one large skull with tusks. At first, the farmers assumed it was an elephant, but to be sure, they called real scientists from the University of Michigan. Upon arrival, Professor Fisher quickly identified the remains as mammoth and noted their excellent condition. He wanted to take the bones for study, but James refused to give them up, citing laws that allow the landowner to dispose of finds at their own discretion. As a result, the farmer displayed the remains in his store, attracting tourists and scientists from all over the country, and additionally selling his products. The race of giants. Let's dive into the mysteries of the past. Once, about 5,000 years ago, real giants walked the lands of China. Their height could reach up to 2 meters, which for those times was simply an astronomical figure. You might wonder, how did people become so tall back then? Scientists believe it was all about abundant food. Some huge people, almost tribal, like in fantasy novels, lived in Shandong province. Their living conditions could be considered quite comfortable for their time. They had access to a variety of food, and their homes had bedrooms and other amenities. Since 2016, researchers have been conducting excavations near the settlement of Zengen, and the giants are not the only amazing discovery. Earlier, they found ruined buildings, numerous burials, and even sacrificial pits. Interestingly, the giants were most likely part of the Longshan Neolithic culture. This is a transitional period from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, when people began to use copper tools. A notable cultural feature is the triple-legged vessels, possibly linked to animal husbandry. Mysterious photo. This picture raises many questions and sparks debate. It shows two mysterious figures, and some people consider them proof of the existence of extraterrestrial beings. On the left, there is a tiny creature with thin limbs, a large head, and characteristic almond-shaped eyes. Its skin has a strange color, as if it's covered with a shimmering film. On the right, there is another figure preserved in a vessel with liquid, resembling exhibits that can be found in scientific laboratories or anatomy museums. Findings like these are often associated with conspiracy theories about UFO crashes, secret laboratories, and experiments. Some claim that this is evidence of extraterrestrial life, while skeptics consider them to be skillfully made dummies or anatomical models. Whether these are real artifacts or just skillful forgeries remains an open question. But one thing can be said for sure: such images fuel interest in the mystery of extraterrestrial intelligence and make us wonder, what if we are not alone in the universe? A woman's fractured skull. At the Chega Sofala Cemetery in southwestern Iran, archaeologists found a skull that still raises troubling questions. It is 6,200 years old. It belonged to a young woman. Her forehead is elongated forward, unnaturally, like the royal mummies of the Maya or the Andean priests. This is the result of intentional modification. In childhood, her head was bound in such a way that over time, it took on an elongated shape. This was done only to the chosen ones, those who belonged to a special caste or who were born to be sacrificed. But the strangest thing is not the shape of the skull, but its fracture. The triangular crack on the left side of the skull is the trace of a powerful blow. Judging by the data, the injury occurred just minutes before death. It was quick and possibly intentional. A wide object, one strong blow. Death was instantaneous. The CT scan showed that the skull was thin. The modification made it fragile. But even in an ordinary person, such a blow would have the same consequences. The blow was not accidental. The location is unusual. The burial is atypical. Everything suggests that the woman was important, so much so that her death was part of a ritual. Bones in the wall. At first I thought it was a fake, but seriously, who nowadays would find bones in their own wall? But the story is real. England. A woman is renovating her house. She opens up a wall, and there, among the old plaster and bricks, are real human bones, a skull, vertebrae. The police arrive and confirm these are indeed human remains, real ones, from around the 19th century, but the exact age remains unknown. This is where things get unsettling, as you realize there's only a thin layer of wallpaper between ordinary life and death. Everything we thought of as the past isn't hidden anymore. It's here in the house. I don't know how those bones got in the wall. Maybe it's a crime, maybe an old buried ritual. But the fact remains, in a real house where someone slept, ate, and lived, there were human remains behind the wall. A Bronze Age burial under the castle. Austrian archaeologists carried out excavations at Gradsky Castle and discovered artifacts from the Copper Age to the Middle Ages. Among the finds were a crescent-shaped earring, a fragment of a bronze bracelet, and ceramics. In one of the excavation sites, archaeologists discovered a burial of the Urnfield culture, one of the oldest examples of cremation of the deceased in the territory of Styria. Restoration work in Gradsky Castle sometimes brings interesting archaeological finds. Thus, in 2010, scientists discovered an unusual early medieval burial. In total, investigators found the skeletons of 9 or 10 men, which were lying on top of each other. Perhaps this was how suicides, unbaptized children, or execution victims were buried. During the excavations, archaeologists discovered finds from different eras. Archaeologists noted that, to their surprise, despite numerous medieval and modern construction works in the area of the castle, the cultural layer from the prehistoric era has been well preserved. In some areas, Its thickness reached 1 meter. Among the finds were fragments of pottery and part of a bronze bracelet, which are attributed to the Urnfield culture. However, some artifacts indicate the presence of people in this area as far back as the Copper Age. In one of the excavations, at a depth of about 1 meter, scientists found a pile of fragments from a ceramic vessel and tiny cremated human remains. According to archaeologists, this is one of the oldest cremation burials in Styria, dating back about 3,000 years. They managed to extract the entire grave and transport it to the museum for study and restoration. It turned out not to be a man. In Jerusalem, archaeologists made an unexpected discovery while studying the burial of an ascetic monk. It turned out that the remains belonged to a woman, which was unusual for monastic practices of that time. The grave was found in Khirbet el Masan, where a Byzantine monastery stood from the 4th to the 7th centuries AD. Heavy iron shackles about 10 cm diameter were found around the skeleton, which initially led scientists to assume that the buried person was a man. However, analysis of the tooth enamel confirmed that it was a woman. This fact overturns the understanding of asceticism in the Byzantine Empire. Although there are written sources about female ascetics, such as Melania the Elder and Melania the Roman, archaeological evidence of such practices is extremely rare. The iron shackles indicate extreme forms of self-restraint in the pursuit of spiritual perfection. Until now, it was believed that such practices were exclusively male. The monastery was located on the route of pilgrims to Jerusalem, which made it an important center not only for prayer, but also a refuge for travelers. The discovery of this burial suggests that women played a more significant role in monastic communities than previously thought. Twice as heavy as a whale, the prehistoric cow lived about 40 million years ago in the water. German paleontologists from the State Museum of Natural History in Stuttgart discovered its remains in southern Peru, where there was an ocean in prehistoric times. 13 vertebrae were found, each weighing about 100 kilograms, 4 1.5-meter ribs, and a giant femur. The excavation site was a shallow bay that divided the equatorial part of the continent in half. Scientists determined that the remains belonged to a creature that lived about 40 million years ago. The creature weighed approximately 340 tons. This makes it the heaviest animal that ever existed on Earth. Even the giant brontosaurs were lighter. After studying the find, scientists concluded that these huge creatures swam slowly, dived shallowly, and fed on what they found on the bottom: algae, mollusks, and small fish. In their way of life, they resembled sea cows, which were exterminated by humans in the 18th century. Externally, they most likely also resembled sea cows, although in reality they were ancient whales of the Basilosaurus genus. 9 Neanderthals near Rome. Italian archaeologists found the fossilized remains of 9 Neanderthals in a cave located near Rome. This clarified how the Italian peninsula was settled and what ancient environmental conditions were like. The archaeological discovery confirmed that the Guattari cave in San Felice Circeo is one of the most significant sites in the world for studying Neanderthal life. A Neanderthal skull was discovered in the cave back in 1939. The fossilized bones found by the archaeologists this time include skulls, 2 teeth, and other remains. The oldest of them dates back to a period between 100,000 and 90,000 years ago. Another 8 Neanderthals are believed to date back to about 50 to 60,000 years ago. Excavations began in 2019. They were carried out in the part of the cave that had not yet been explored, and included a lake first noted by anthropologist Alberto Carlo Blanc, who is credited with discovering the Neanderthal skull in 1939. Archaeologists have already called the find an extraordinary discovery that will be talked about around the world. The large number of remains suggests that the Neanderthal population was significant. This, in turn, indicates the existence of the first human society. The cave has perfectly preserved the environment that existed here 50,000 years ago. The fossilized remains of animals such as elephants, rhinoceroses, and giant deer found in the cave provide insight into the flora and fauna of this region and its climate. A new species of predator. Scientists have discovered the skull of Basterdodon certos, a new species of predator in the Egyptian desert that lived 30 million years ago. This large carnivorous mammal belonged to the extinct group of hyenodonts and was at the top of the food chain, hunting primates, ancient hippos, and elephants. Bastetodon got its name in honor of the goddess Bastet, the patroness of cats and protector from misfortune. Its muzzle and teeth really resemble those of a cat. This animal was about the size of a leopard, had powerful jaws and extremely sharp teeth, allowing it to be a formidable predator. The discovery was made in the Fayum Depression, which millions of years ago was a green forest, but has now turned into a desert. This place provides knowledge about the ancient ecosystems of Africa. Hyenodonts were the dominant predators, but climate change and the appearance of more advanced competitors led to their extinction. Now, the ancestors of modern cats and dogs have taken their place in nature. Pickled mummy. Researchers discovered that in the mummy, which is called the Mysterious Lady, a small fetus had been preserved for more than 2,000 years. Their discovery is based on CT scan data and was published in the journal Archaeological Science. The Mysterious Lady is not just a mummy. She was pregnant at the time of her death and was part of the Thebes community. Her age at the time of death is estimated to be between 20 and 30 years, and the fetus was between 26 and 30 weeks old. And this is the only known case of a pregnant mummy that underwent the mummification process. Amazingly, until last summer, no one knew about the fetus in her womb. Previous studies using X-rays did not detect it because its bones were mineralized. It turned out that the Mysterious Lady did not die during childbirth. Her body was treated with natron. This is a type of salt that dries out the body and acts as a disinfectant. And the fetus was left untouched by those who mummified the body, which allowed the womb to remain in perfect condition. Thanks to this, researchers discovered that the blood in the fetus became more acidic as the levels of ammonia and formic acid increased, which led to the mineralization of the bones. And since the womb remained tightly sealed, the fetus was kind of pickled, preserved for more than 2,000 years. However, the question remains, why did the embalmers leave the fetus in the body when all the other organs were removed? Whose hand is this? Today we'll journey to the past and explore the mysterious world of the ancient Romans. Our starting point will be Vindolanda Fort, one of the first Roman military camps on the territory of modern England. Over many centuries, 9 fortifications were built here. In 2018, an amazing discovery was made here. Researchers found a bronze hand the size of a child's, but this is not just a hand. On its palm, there was a place for something that, unfortunately, has not survived to this day. And at the base of the hand, there is a hole, as if it was attached to something. The mystery becomes even more interesting because the hand was found not far from the temple of Jupiter Dalicinus. Most likely the hand was part of some religious ritual. Similar finds have been made in other temples of this god. Now you can see this hand in the Vindolanda Museum. This is a vivid reminder that the life of the temple and the practices associated with the worship of Dalicinus were much richer than people previously thought. And the most interesting thing is that all knowledge about the cult of Jupiter Dalicinus is based on rare inscriptions, sculptures, and other examples of art found in different corners of the former Roman Empire. So every new discovery is a step toward unraveling this ancient mystery. What do you think this hand could have been used for? Could this hand have been used for some mystical purpose? Write your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. I'll continue. Mummified penguins. Researchers from China and Antarctica discovered a cemetery of mummified penguins, and many of them were just chicks. At first, scientists thought that the penguins didn't survive 2 periods of extreme precipitation, but penguins live in Antarctica and are used to the cold and snow. So something doesn't quite add up here. Now, scientists suggest that climate change is to blame for these mass penguin deaths. In their opinion, the increased humidity caused by global warming could have led to this tragedy. As it turned out, the penguins were not prepared for such conditions and died immediately. This happened twice, about 750 and 200 years ago. Scientists found this out using radiocarbon dating, and it seems that the penguins did not die immediately, but died gradually. The Skull of Fate. These crystal masterpieces appeared long before the beginning of civilization and are carved with amazing precision without a single chip. And despite all the achievements of the 21st century, we are still far from such precision. Only primitive tools were used to create these skulls. Scientists have always been fascinated by the stories of the ancient Maya civilization. They lived 1,500 years ago and were remarkably advanced for their time. In 1930, during excavations in the Maya city of Labantun, one of these crystal skulls was found. Archaeologist Frederick Mitchell Hedges discovered it. This discovery raised the question of how the Maya could have created a skull with such precision using only primitive tools. This question remains unanswered even today, but our mysteries continue. In Belize, the remains of a human in jars about 14,000 years old were found. But how did an ancient Asian end up in America at all? This remains a mystery that we have yet to solve, just like the true reason for the creation of the crystal skulls. Skeletons in unusual graves. In the Negev desert in southern Israel, archaeologists discovered burials that are about 2,500 years old. Can you imagine? Inside them, there are as many as 50 skeletons, which, according to researchers, may belong to women who were sold into slavery. The most interesting thing about these finds is the shape of the tombs. We are used to seeing round-shaped burials in the Negev desert, but these two tombs are unique and are square in shape. Plus, they are located in a very unusual place at the intersection of two trade routes that once connected Egypt, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. Scientists note that such burials at crossroads are not as surprising as they might seem. After all, people who died in the harsh conditions of the desert from disease and violence were often buried right where they died. However, in ancient times, such crossroads were considered sacred places with ritual and religious significance. Now to the most important part. During the excavations, many artifacts were discovered, dating back to around 7,500 years before the Common Era. All of them were produced in different places: southern Lebanon, the Levant, the South Arabian Peninsula, and of course, Egypt. This, as well as the jewelry and amulets found in the tombs, confirms the assumption that women who were sold into slavery and transported from Egypt are buried here. But this still needs to be confirmed. In a ritual cave used by ancient necromancers, 30 kilometers from Jerusalem, in the Tiamim cave in the Judean mountains, researchers discovered ancient oil lamps, axes, and even human skulls. But the real magic and mysticism are still ahead. This cave was discovered back in 1873. Inside it, there are hidden underground corridors, a water spring that is believed to have special healing properties, and many artifacts. Researchers suggest that this cave was a secret refuge for necromancers. Necromancers are people who try to communicate with the souls of the dead using death magic. In the Roman Empire, their activities were forbidden, but they still continued their rituals, hiding in secluded places like the Tiamim cave. The items found were often used in magical rituals, where through fire and metal people tried to contact the spirits of their ancestors. Lamps and other items were hidden in narrow cracks in the cave walls, which suggests that they were placed there intentionally. According to scientists, mystical rituals, fortune-telling, and possibly even sacrifices were performed in the cave. The cave was a kind of portal to the spirit world. Fingerprints of an ancient human. Archaeologists discovered an amazing Iron Age statue with well-preserved fingerprints of its creator, which gives us a glimpse into the lives of our ancestors more than 3,000 years ago. This ancient clay figure, dated to the 9th or 10th century BC, was found at the bottom of a lake in Italy and, according to experts, has ritual significance. The discovery was made in Lake Bolsena, a volcanic lake where archaeologists found a clay sculpture resembling a palm-sized female figure. Usually such figures are found in burial sites. However, this one was discovered in an area that was once a residential zone of a submerged settlement. The team from the Underwater Archaeology Service and the Italian Cultural Heritage Restoration Group, together with state divers, played a key role in preserving and recovering this artifact. Researchers note that the statue is so well preserved that the fingerprints of the master who created it are visible on it. This suggests that the sculpture might have been a trial version rather than a finished work. This discovery also sheds light on the ancient Italian settlement of Iola, which scientists believe existed during the Iron Age. The Gran Caro di Bolsena region, where the discovery was made, is associated with volcanic activity and has a rich history, the study of which began only in 1991, when researchers found a cluster of unworked stones, presumably belonging to the early Iron Age. Skin and scales on the ancient skeleton. Paleontologists studied an amazingly well-preserved skeleton of a plesiosaur, which was found in Germany back in 1940. The fossil lay for decades in the museum garden until, in 2020, scientists discovered that it preserved soft tissues, skin, and even cell nuclei. This discovery helps us better understand the appearance of ancient marine reptiles that lived 183 million years ago. The body of the plesiosaur was sealed in the Posidonia shales, which allowed the skin to be preserved along the spine and flipper. It turned out to be thicker than previously thought and resembled the skin of sea turtles. Microscopic analysis showed that the tissue structure matches that of modern reptiles. The most amazing discovery was the scales on the flipper. They resemble the scales of snakes and lizards and may have helped the plesiosaur either when moving along the bottom or when maneuvering in the water. Scientists compare the appearance of this reptile to a hybrid of a leatherback and a green turtle, and the appearance of long-necked plesiosaurs is still being debated. But this discovery provides the first real evidence of what they looked like. An ancient city in central China. In the area of Taotaojiang village in Henan province, central China, archaeologists have discovered an urban settlement from the Shang dynasty. The discovered city measures 560 meters from east to west and 330 meters from north to south. So far, archaeologists have found 27 tombs and various artifacts in this area, including more than 70 bronze items, weapons, tools, pottery and jade vessels, as well as bone objects. In addition, residential and production areas with kilns, wells, and special pits were discovered within the city. To the east of the city, archaeologists also found a ring-shaped trench about 330 meters long from north to south and about 300 meters wide from east to west, indicating the defensive nature of this site. The clear functional zoning of the area shows the city was highly developed. According to scientists, this discovery has great archaeological significance for the study of the culture of the Shang dynasty period. The oldest archaeological research continues. The mummy of the legendary slave Marco Venerius Secundio. The research team of the Pompeii project, during another excavation in the famous lost city of Pompeii, discovered a tomb with the remains of a mummified person. The inscription on it indicates that the tomb contains the legendary slave who managed to become one of the most influential citizens. The discovery was made during the most recent excavations, carried out by archaeologists in the Porto Sarno necropolis. Researchers excavated a tomb inside which a mummified human body was found. On the marble slab located on the tomb's pediment, there is a commemorative inscription. It is dedicated to Marcus Venerius Secundio, whom archaeologists believe to be the owner of the tomb. This is a very important discovery as it practically proves for the first time that Greek influence in Pompeii was significant. Written sources repeatedly mention public performances that were held in Greek in Pompeii, but until now, there was no direct archaeological evidence of this. The figure of Mark Venerius Secundio is so significant that he is mentioned multiple times in the archives of the city of Pompeii. For example, this name often appears on wax tablets kept in the personal archive of the local banker Cecilius Giocondus, the owner of the house of the same name on Via Vesuvio. From these, it is known that Mark Venerius was a slave and the keeper of the Temple of Venus. He managed to gain his freedom. After becoming a free man, he achieved a fairly high social status and built up a considerable fortune. The inscription on the discovered monumental tomb indicates that he was a member of several powerful societies, including the College of Priests of the Imperial Cult. The epitaph also states that he staged Greek and Latin performances for 4 days. The deceased was buried in a small burial chamber measuring 1.60 meters by 2.40 meters, located behind the main facade. By the way, during the inspection of the tomb, 2 funerary urns with traces of cremation were found. Priestess from Peru. Archaeologists in Peru have found the burial of a woman that is more than 1,000 years old. She was lying in a grave surrounded by important items, vessels, jewelry, fragments of fabrics. These things indicate her high status. Most likely, she was a priestess. The burial was arranged with attention to detail. Her body was carefully laid out, and around her were items related to rituals or worship. They helped preserve her memory and status even after death. This is not just a grave, it's a sign of respect and reverence. Interestingly, despite its age, this find is quite well preserved. The fabric, the jewelry, even the bones, all are in good condition. The sand and dryness helped preserve details that usually disappear over centuries. Thailand's oldest child. In the Tam Tam Din cave in Thailand, archaeologists made an incredible discovery. They found the remains of a child who lived about 29,000 years ago. This find became the oldest human burial in the country and opens up a completely new chapter in the history of ancient Thailand. Excavations in the cave began back in 2020, but only recently were they able to discover a fully preserved skeleton of a child buried in a special ritual pose. The arms and legs are tightly pressed to the body, which indicates the use of bandages or ropes. Traces of a fire were found nearby. Ancient people would light a fire during the burial ritual, probably believing in its purifying power. Interestingly, archaeologists found ancient rock paintings, animal bones, and stone tools near the burial site. This suggests that the cave was an important place not only for burials, but also for prehistoric people to live in for thousands of years. The earliest cultural traditions of ancient Southeast Asian inhabitants may have started here. Orichalcum, the metal from Atlantis. Orichalcum is a mysterious metal described by ancient Greek authors as a lost alloy of the Atlanteans. This alloy was compared to the golden curls of Aphrodite, and orichalcum was strong enough to make a shield for Heracles. It is unknown whether this substance actually existed or not. Orichalcum, above all, is described by Plato in his dialogue Critias, where he talks about the city of Atlantis. On the island of Atlantis, this metal was mined from natural deposits. The Atlanteans mined all the necessary metal in the mines on their island. Orichalcum was considered the second most valuable metal after gold and was regarded as a mystical metal. The mystical metal came to be seen as a mineral created exclusively for special people chosen by the gods. Religious sects used the mystical aura of the metal for their own purposes. For example, Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, claimed that the command plates were made of orichalcum. In literature, Plato's metal is usually considered to be a brass alloy, but the ancient Greeks knew about brass and used this alloy. The ore was called zinc-copper ore. This alloy has a light golden hue. It can be mistaken for gold. Brass is comparable in strength to bronze and was used to make shields, armor, and weapons. Recently, another argument appeared in favor of the theory that orichalcum was a brass alloy. A 6th century BC ship was found on the seabed off the coast of Sicily in Italy. The discovery was made in 2014. At the shipwreck site, metal ingots of a reddish golden hue were found. Scientists suggested that the ingots were made of orichalcum alloy, the mythical material of the Atlanteans. On the ship, remains of weapons, fragments of amphorae, and containers for transporting crude oil, which was a valuable commodity at the time, were discovered. It is believed that this was a merchant ship whose crew had weapons and armor to protect themselves from pirates. By analyzing the composition of the ingots, they identified copper and zinc as the main components of the brass alloy. The hypothesis that orichalcum is an alloy of copper and gold arose from a transcription error in Plato's ancient Greek name for this metal. The word means mountain copper, but during translation it became aurichalk, meaning golden copper. Aurichalk was considered a noble metal, so the hypothesis of alloying it with gold might have made sense. But adding gold to the alloy makes the metal softer and heavier. It would be inappropriate for armor, weapons, or shields to be made from such an alloy. An artifact of an unknown civilization. How about a journey into the past, where archaeological discoveries challenge everything we know about our history? It all started in February of that year. 3 adventurers, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Meixel, set out on a hike to Mount Kosu to enrich their collection of antiquities. Imagine their surprise when, among the ordinary mountain rocks, they found a stone that simply couldn't have been there. A day later, Michael decided to work on the stone and discovered something incredible. Inside the stone was a ceramic cylinder, and inside the cylinder was a metal rod that, for some reason, reacted to a magnet. There were also fragments of fossilized shells and pebbles found inside. The friends showed the find to a geologist they knew, who, after a detailed examination, said that, in his opinion, this stone was at least 500,000 years old. Can you imagine? 500,000 years. If that's the case, then our find rewrites the entire history of human development. After all, how can we explain metallic elements inside such an ancient stone? Unfortunately, we don't have a detailed description of this research, nor do we know the geologist's name. But one thing we do know for sure, the stone was studied by the creationist Ron Cayley. He took an X-ray and discovered that the rod had a spring. So it's possible that this was some kind of ancient electrical mechanism. But who created it and for what purpose? 5 skeletons were found in the wolf's lair. During excavations at the site of the wolf's lair in Poland, where Adolf Hitler's main headquarters was located, archaeologists discovered 5 human skeletons. The discovery included the remains of 3 adults and 2 children, one of whom was a newborn. The peculiarity of the burial is that the bodies were naked and missing limbs, which indicates the unusual nature of the burial. The wolf's lair, hidden in a dense forest and protected by barbed wire, guard towers, and minefields, served as the place where Nazi leaders planned their military operations. This base was destroyed by the Nazis as they retreated before the Red Army in January 1945. Among the artifacts found near the bodies were thunderstones, fossils of ancient sea creatures that were once believed to be magical talismans capable of bringing luck in battles or protecting against lightning. Octavian Bartoszewski, a participant in the excavation, suggested that the bodies might have been buried as a ritual sacrifice to ensure success and prosperity for those who occupied the building. Hermann Göring, the previous owner of the building, was known for his interest in the occult, which may explain the presence of such an unusual burial in his residence. The Nazis, including Hitler, were known for their obsession with the supernatural, which was reflected in their fondness for various occult practices and theories. This discovery not only confirms the dark legacy of the Nazi regime, but once again demonstrates its willingness to use any means, including mysticism and sacrifice, to achieve its goals. What did a 16-year-old girl from the 7th century look like? We will travel back 13 centuries to meet a mysterious girl who may have been from a royal family and one of the first Christians in England. Remember the year 2012? An amazing archaeological discovery was made on the outskirts of Cambridge, United Kingdom. Archaeologists found the remains of a 16-year-old girl buried in 7th century soil. Scientists reconstructed her face using 3D modeling technology based on the girl's skull. And although they are not sure about the color of her eyes and hair without DNA analysis, the model gives us an idea of what our heroine looked like. She had a distinctive feature. Her left eye was slightly lower than her right, which was noticeable when meeting her. Although she was found in the United Kingdom, she is originally from Central Europe, most likely from southern Germany. The cause of her death remains a mystery, but signs of illness indicate that she was struggling with some kind of disease. Our unknown woman was buried in the style of royalty, on a carved wooden bed with a gold and garnet cross, surrounded by jewelry and beautiful clothing. It seems that she was from the aristocracy or even the royal family, and what is especially surprising is that she was a Christian, which was rare in England at that time. Remains of monsters. Researchers who had struggled for decades with the harsh Antarctic conditions discovered the fossilized remains of an Elasmosaurus. These were real titans of the Cretaceous period, living alongside the dinosaurs. Scientists discovered most of the skeleton of this giant. True, the head was missing, but even without it, they drew a conclusion. This beast weighed between 12 and 15 tons and was about 12 meters long. Can you imagine? For comparison, previously, they found an Elasmosaurus weighing about 5 tons and members of the genus Aristonectes weighing up to 11 tons. However, scientists are not completely sure which genus our giant belongs to. It might be a genus unknown to us. And here's something else interesting. This marine giant lived about 30,000 years before the extinction of the dinosaurs, which confirms the theory that Elasmosaurs inhabited the late Cretaceous period. Kabayan mummies? We usually associate mummification primarily with ancient Egypt, but this practice also existed in other cultures, One of the most unusual methods was used by ancient Filipinos who mummified their dead with the help of smoke. Their method had nothing to do with bandages and the traditional embalming of the Egyptians, but it was no less effective. One of the largest burial sites of this type was discovered at the end of the 20th century in a cave in the province of Cagayan, and the find was named the Fire Mummy. According to scientists' estimates, the remains found are 500 to 700 years old. The mummification process began while the person was still alive. The dying person was given a very salty drink to dehydrate the body. After death, the body was placed in a sitting position and smoked over a fire for a long time. This process could last several months, after which the mummy was placed in a pine coffin and left in a cave. This method allowed the bodies to be preserved in amazingly good condition even after centuries. It is believed that such a practice had not only a ritual, but also a spiritual meaning. The souls of the deceased remained a part of their people. Crowned figurine with a falcon. Archaeologists discovered a small figurine in Oslo depicting a person wearing a crown and holding a falcon on their arm. This find dates back to around the year 1200. It may depict a king or queen, for example, the Norwegian King Haakon IV, known as Haakon the Old. The earliest evidence of falconry goes back to the pre-literate era. For example, Hittite steles depicting this practice are known, dating to around the 13th century BC. However, in Europe, falconry spread much later, which was probably connected to the invasion of the Alans and Huns during the era of the Great Migration. But in the Middle Ages, it became one of the important leisure activities of the privileged classes of society. Thus, the bones of these birds can be found in the rich burials of Viking warriors, and their images appear on runestones. Moreover, for the Scandinavians, selling falcons was even an important source of income. Archaeologists from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research conducted excavations in Oslo at the site of a medieval district. The researchers discovered a small horn figurine, about 7.5 centimeter long, depicting a person with a crown on their head and a falcon sitting on their hand. There is a crown depicted on the head, but it is difficult to determine whether the figurine represents a king or a queen. However, in those years, women also practiced falconry. This find was made in the area of the park, next to which there was a royal palace until the year 1300. Therefore, scientists suggest that the figurine could have belonged to a noble person, including the king himself. Drawings vanished in the sands of civilization. These frescoes are proof that the desert was once home to steppe flora and fauna, heavy rains, and cool rivers. Even the name Tasselin translates as river plateau. In our time, almost nothing is known about the lost civilization of the Sahara, which left us not temples or other structures, but only caves full of rock paintings. Saharan rock art is an important field of archaeological research, focused on precious images carved or painted on natural rock surfaces. The mountain ranges of Tibesti and Ahagar represent an impressive open-air museum that contains numerous archaeological monuments. Researchers have cataloged more than 5,000 cave paintings, although they believe that in the past there were many more. According to experts, the age of the rock paintings ranges from 10,000 to 15,000 years. In the caves, there are frescoes depicting elephants, hippopotamuses, alligators, giraffes, and ostriches, proving that in the distant past, the Sahara region was full of life. The oldest paintings depict people with large, round heads. If you follow the chronological sequence of the images, you can notice that after some time, the bodies in the drawings became longer, but the shape of the head remained exaggeratedly round. Later on, illustrations appear in the form of fantastic creatures of incredible size. These are strange figures in clothing, headgear resembling helmets, with straps and other accessories that clearly did not exist at that time. The people of Tassili Najar left behind two great mysteries. First, no burials have been found in the region. Second, there are strange drawings of unusual creatures. The biggest mystery is that ancient people depicted everything they saw in their paintings. What explanation can be given for the creatures in the drawings that are completely different from their own appearance? Could a Stone Age person, free from harsh, surrealistic fantasies and considered primitive, create something like this? It seems unbelievable. It's clear that Saharan culture developed alongside the powerful civilizations of Egypt, India, and ancient China. However, unlike them, the history of ancient Sahara lasted for about 1,000 years, and then disappeared under the relentless sand, leaving behind only cave paintings. The pharaoh who was forgotten. Everyone knows Tutankhamun, the golden mask, the curse, billions of views on YouTube, but there is a pharaoh whom almost no one knows, and yet his tomb is even richer. Susens I ruled Egypt from around 1047 to 998 BC. This was a period that historians politely call the Late Period, when the great empire was already falling apart at the seams. Power was divided between the pharaohs and the priests, and all that remained of the former great homeland were just memories. And so this pharaoh of the era of decline lay in a sarcophagus made of silver. Not gold, but silver. For a modern person, the difference is not obvious. But in ancient Egypt, it was the opposite. Gold was mined in Nubia. There was a relatively large amount of it. Silver, on the other hand, was not found in Egypt at all. It was brought from afar, through trade routes that stretched across the entire Middle East. Silver was a rarity. Silver was a luxury that was more expensive than gold. Susens's silver sarcophagus is not just beautiful, it's a display of wealth that, in the context of its time, surpasses Tutankhamun's golden mask. The tomb was discovered in 1940 in Tanis. The French archaeologist Pierre Montet opened an untouched burial. Untouched is the key word. Most Egyptian tombs were looted back in ancient times, but not this one. Everything remained in place. Jewelry, vessels, burial equipment. Why does no one know about him? Partly it was just bad timing. Montet announced the discovery in May 1940, and on the same day German troops began their offensive against France. Newspapers around the world were covering something else. The sensation was drowned in war reports and never resurfaced. That's how history works. Tutankhamun was discovered in peacetime and became an icon. Susens was discovered at the beginning of World War II and remains unknown. His silver sarcophagus is now kept in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, in the same building as Tutankhamun's golden mask. There are lines for Tutankhamun. Almost no one goes to Susenis. Sometimes being richer is not enough. You also need to choose the right moment. The mysterious harpy. The Queen of the Night relief, created around 1800 BC, is one of the most mysterious artifacts in Mesopotamia. Also known as the Burney relief, it depicts a winged goddess with bird claws instead of feet, standing on the backs of two lions. On either side of her are owls, symbolizing power over the darkness of night and the spirit world. The identity of the depicted goddess remains a subject of debate. Some researchers believe that this is Ishtar, or Inanna, the Babylonian goddess of love, war, and fertility. Others suggest that the relief depicts Eresh-ki-gal, the grim mistress of the underworld and sister of Ishtar. The symbolism of the relief points to the power and supernatural strength of the goddess. The relief was probably a cult object associated with religious rituals or magical practices. Its rich detailing and monumentality speak to the importance of the deity's depiction in the beliefs of that era. Today, this artifact is kept in the British Museum. Antarctic sarcophagi. During an international scientific expedition in Antarctica, a group of researchers from the United States, China, Russia, and India discovered an object that immediately sparked controversy and concern. At a depth of several dozen meters beneath the permafrost, 4 dark sarcophagi were found, smooth and even with corners and edges so perfect that it could indicate laser processing. The shape resembled monolithic slabs, and the sarcophagi themselves maintained a stable temperature above zero, despite the surrounding cold. Researchers recorded a low-frequency humming and slight tremors in the soil in the immediate vicinity of the objects, although none of the equipment in the camp could have been the source of such vibrations. When one of the sarcophagi was opened, a metal cylinder with symbols unrelated to any known scripts was found. Scientists are proposing several theories about the origin of the discovery. One hypothesis suggests that the sarcophagi may be remnants of an ancient civilization that existed before the last ice age. Another hypothesis allows for a technological origin and a connection to as yet unidentified technological experiments during the Cold War era. However, supporters of ufological theories believe that what we see is a fragment of an extraterrestrial structure, abandoned or hidden under the ice many thousands of years ago. Despite the uproar, official data about the incident remains limited, and the sarcophagi themselves were taken away for further study in closed laboratories. An encounter with them ended in disaster. Northern peoples have a legend about creatures that almost always brought disaster to anyone who encountered them. Among the Nenets, they were called Sihirtia, those who dig burrows. According to legend, they were a short people who lived in the hills. Their dwellings had an entrance from above, and they only came outside at night or in thick fog. During the day, they were impossible to see, even if you walked past. Accidental encounters are only described in fragments. Hunters might spot a small woman the size of a child, hear strange sounds, or stumble upon a forgotten object. In one legend, a Sihirtia girl, frightened by people, ran away and left behind a tiny bag. Everyone who touched it later died from illness. These stories were passed down as a warning. It's better not to get involved with these Sihirtia. For a long time, they were considered imaginary spirits of the tundra, but archaeology has cast doubt on that. On Mamayev Cape in Yamal, they found a settlement of a people who lived here before the arrival of the Nenets. In the graves, there were dozens of metal objects, jewelry, knives, and dishes. The Nenets did not work with metal, and the skeletons themselves belonged to people of short stature, not dwarfs, but noticeably shorter than modern northerners. Their specialization turned out to be especially strange. In the tundra, wooden models of pickaxe-shaped tools were found. Farming is impossible here, which means the pickaxes were used to extract mammoth ivory. It was the tusks that could have been the source of wealth. In Europe, mammoth powder was used as medicine, and tusks were highly prized. That's why legends depicted the Sihirtia with bullhorns. That's what the Nenets called tusks emerging from the ground. Over time, mentions of the Sihirtia disappear. Scientists link this to the Little Ice Age and migrations. Perhaps the tribe went to Timir, or perhaps they assimilated. There is a theory that the Sihirtia and the white-eyed Chud are actually the same people, and then the legend turns out not to be a fairy tale, but a distorted memory of people who lived differently, looked different, and disappeared, leaving behind only fear and traces in the permafrost. That's exactly why I love archaeology. It constantly challenges our certainty about the past and proves that history wasn't as we understand it today. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Goodbye, everyone.